Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Chillflow, playing as the innominable Dawi against the filthy peasant hordes of Brettonia. So I wanted to do a bit more of a trollish build. I've definitely been on a kick with just silly, non-competitive builds lately. And continuing on with that theme, I decided to do a mass artillery build against the Brettonians. For my Lord here, I did decide to bring a Rune Lord because I'm going cheap, and as cheap as I possibly can go. Obviously, the Rune Lord is pretty tanky. In this case, he's not even on his anvil. So if he gets in melee, he's just going to be getting knocked around. Nothing special, but he does have Master Rune of Negation and Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. So with that, you can potentially get a lot of damage out on critical targets, usually Brettonian cavalry, and slow them down, prevent them from getting to your backline, that sort of stuff. He's backed by two runesmiths with the exact same loadout, Runes of Wrath and Ruin, as well as Runes of Negation. Obviously, I was figuring that my opponent would probably bring a mass of squires and questing knights and units like that. So the extra armor, oath and steel, is usually not too useful in my opinion against most players who go against dwarves because you just see so much armor piercing. My front line is composed of three longbeards with great weapons. Definitely not an impressive front line. I do bring great weapons mostly because great weapons do an okay job against cavalry as well as infantry. Obviously, against Brettonian infantry, you don't have to worry too much. These guys will basically trash anything the Brettonians put on the field. But the Brettonian cavalry can definitely be a bit of a nuisance, and so I definitely figured that the Longbeards would be the way to go. My backline defense is composed of two Slayers as well as the Dragonback Slayers in the very back here. I probably should have, in retrospect, I probably should have put the Dragonback Slayers over in the center so they could flex to wherever they're needed, because that special ability, that slow, is definitely very useful, but I did not, so unfortunately they're out over here on the flank. And then my artillery contingent, I did bring a lone Goblobber. This is actually for counter battery duty. I did figure that the Brettonians might bring a trebuchet, having personally seen how effective trebuchet is going to be against dwarves as Brettonia. And the Goblobber is very good at routing Brettonian trebs because, as you can see, it does have this effect, discouraged. And Brettonians do not have good morale, as we all know. And the trebuchets have really bad morale, 48 leadership. So once they come under fire from artillery, they fall apart rather quickly, and you can potentially just get them off the field very, very quick with the help of a unit like this. Then three organ guns. The organ guns are obviously a pretty good piece against enemy artillery, as well as infantry, as well as enemy horsemen or enemy cavalry. So they're basically a jack of all trades artillery piece. They do have a bit of short range, so they can definitely struggle against specialized artillery pieces that way, but by and large I think they're a very potent unit. As you can see, no mobile skirmishing though, so I'm relying on spreading out my artillery pieces, trying to get the maximum value out of them. I've got about 4,000 points worth of artillery here, so definitely a very expensive investment, about a third of my army. For my opponent, definitely catching me off guard with a very interesting build. Not sure it's the most competitive or the way I'd go, but I definitely was surprised by this. A front line composed of some foot squires, men-at-arms, unshielded variant, so a lot of cannon fodder, two foot squires. I do believe it's actually 3 foot squires by the look of it. Battle pilgrims, which definitely caught me off guard. Why bring battle pilgrims? But they do have good leadership. They do have surprisingly decent weapon strength, and against slayers, for example, they'll probably beat them down. And even against dwarf warriors with their good melee attack, they'll probably do an okay job, just because they can hit fairly consistently. For his backline, my opponent does have a surprising amount of peasant bows. He does have peasant bowmen with fire arrows, peasant bowmen with pox arrows, and some vanilla peasant bowmen, I guess. I'm a little surprised by the peasant bowmen with fire arrows. These guys actually have less armor piercing damage, which is kind of significant against dwarves. If you look, they are doing 21 and 2 rather than the 20 or 16 and 3. So probably they'll still do more damage, but nonetheless a little surprising. For his only cavalry, my opponent actually just brought a Grail Guardians over here, you can see, as well as some Knights Errant. Of course, that trebuchet in the back. And he did bring 2 Grail Reliques. So once again, a bit of an interesting pick, maybe trying to just grind things out in the front line. The Grail Relique against dwarves, I think, is a bit of a waste, unless you're specifically trying to keep some unit on the field. The Grail Relique only provides 12 leadership and immunity to fear and terror. Well, 12 leadership is a lot, but immunity to fear and terror against dwarves is basically useless. The dwarves have almost nothing that causes... Actually, vanilla dwarves have nothing that causes fear and terror, I think. Unless one of the lords does, but I don't think any of the lords do either. So as you can see, I'm actually pushing the Goblobber forward, trying to get it to get some shots into my opponent's troops. The Goblobber is incredibly precise. It's one of the benefits of veteraned up grudge throwers is that they are basically they're supremely accurate. And you can see the first few rocks there flying after these peasant bowmen, just trying to get a little bit of early damage in. Do a little bit of damage, but as you can see, the Discourage effect actually having quite a bit of an impact. I do believe the Grail Relic does not actually protect against Discourage effects. Regardless, you can see a few more rocks do fly in, knocking off a few more models, but shortly thereafter we're going to shift fire onto the Field Trebuchet. In the meantime, you can see the Organ Gun teeing off on these Men-at-Arms. Definitely a bit of a waste. Definitely should have been aiming somewhere else, probably at the Foot Squires, which this Organ Gun is about to start doing. Definitely I tried to widen my front line with the Longbeards, trying to spread them out as much as possible. You can see the Organ Guns here teeing off on these Battle Pilgrims now. And in the meantime, the Trebuchet is going to start firing on my Longbeards. And you can see I pulled the Longbeards back as I do push the Goblobber forward. And one of the big problems here is that I'm trying to keep my front line as far away from my back line as possible, while at the same time needing to deal with that Trebuchet. You can see some fire arrows here peppered away by the Longbeards, but they're 100 armor. These guys can basically just shrug that off, especially with the inaccuracy of the Dwarf Peasants. But you can see the Goblobber is coming online here and is going to be able to start teeing off on that Trebuchet pretty quickly. Anytime the backline, you can see the Peasant Bowmen getting smacked around by that Organ Gun. The other Organ Gun firing on the Foot Squires. Unfortunately, when the units are in this sort of loose formation, it's definitely a bit of a struggle. On the flank, though, you can see the other Organ Gun firing away at these Grail Guardians, knocking them down quite a bit. These guys do have a 20% physical resist, but it's not going to, you can see over, actually, let's look at the back. You can see the Field Trebuchet is already wavering. It's going to be offline pretty soon just because of those Goblobber shots. That one last volley is going to be enough to take them offline. And over here, you can see this Organ Gun just trying to get these shots into the Grail Guardians, trying to shut them down. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think you're better off bringing Questing Knights against the Dwarves because the Grail Guardians don't have the best of melee attack. They don't have very good offensive stats. They're very much tanky. But Dwarves don't have the greatest anti-cavalry options to begin with, outside of Slayers, which are going to overwhelm you anyway. And the weapon strength, I think, is a bit wasted, especially because 25% of it is lost thanks to magic. So personally, I think Grail Guardians are a bit of a waste. I think you're better off bringing something like Questing Knights, honestly, for raw damage output. Regardless, you can see the Trebuchet here getting shoved offline. You can see over here I'm pushing my Runesmith, trying to get him into the fray. Goblobber does fire off a few more shots, but unfortunately, despite doing quite a bit of damage, it's just going to get knocked offline by the Peasant fire. Peasants, as I've mentioned before, archers are surprisingly good at taking artillery pieces offline if you just focus fire. Over here, the Battle Pilgrims are getting trashed by the Runesmith and melee. Over here, you can see the Organ Gun is trying to get into firing position. One of the other Organ Guns firing at those Grail Guardians, trying to take them offline. And you can see these guys are definitely losing some models. They do lose several there. You can just lose volleys of armor-piercing shot just tearing into those guys. Obviously, the Fan Enchanters can heal them, but it's definitely some rough stuff. Unfortunately, here I make a huge mistake and my Slayers get caught by the Foot Squires, which is a terrible trade. Foot Squires do have 70 armor. I think Slayers might beat them in a straight-up fight, but it's really not a good trade-off. Really not where I want them to be. In the meantime, you can see the Archer Fire just overwhelms my Goblobber, taking it offline, but my opponent has forgotten about his Field Trebuchet and is not using it right now. In the meantime, here in the front, the Fan Enchanters did try to get a cast off with the, not Comet of Cast Endora, but the other one. The Chalice of Potions, but she does get caught. I did forget to mention her spell. She did bring Earthblood and Regrowth, otherwise... So basically the usual. Over here, the Longbeards are collapsing on these Battle Pilgrims. You can see in the back line things definitely looking rough for the Peasants. But my Organ Gun does get taken offline because my Slayers are tied down here fighting the Foot Squires. So that means there's no defense on these Organ Guns. So definitely some rough stuff. My opponent definitely taking advantage of my somewhat disorderly defense here. But over here, the Knights Errant do get caught by the Dragonback Slayers, so not a good spot for them. They only have 80 armor. They're really not very tanky. Terrible melee stats, honestly. They're definitely one of those cavalry units I'm not a big fan of, but they are cheap, which is probably their big redeeming feature. But they do get dragged into the muck here very, very quickly. In the meantime, the Organ Gun is teeing off, providing some fire support to this flank, but unfortunately the crew here has routed. They've been shattered. They're down to, they actually had 8 models still, so that's a little unfortunate, because had they not shattered, that would have been enough to crew 2 Organ Guns, and I lost them completely. But you can see these Grail Guardians here trying to push in and help against Slayers. In my opinion, definitely a big mistake, because Slayers do hit pretty hard, and they're not going to break to a rear charge. And in the meantime, these Organ Guns are just going to keep teeing off. Now, my front line is buckling, but the Runesmiths, because my opponent focused so heavily on a mob of infantry that's of non-armor piercing infantry, Battle Pilgrims are going to struggle to take down a Runesmith. Runesmith has 120 armor. He's got only 32 melee defense, but he's just so tanky. 120 armor. That's all you need to know. He's not going to go down easily. Anytime the Longbeard's routing on 6 models, you can see the Longbeard's the legendary Dwarvish stalwartness. They are getting peppered down by some filthy peasant fire, but it's just not doing too much. In the meantime, the Organ Gun still teeing off, destroying these Grail Guardians. They are down to 9 models, 543 HP. Those unchivalrous dwarves firing volley after volley. You can see dropping that guy. Oh my goodness, look at those guys go. I love just the volley of kind of small shot pouring into these Grail Guardians, and they do actually rout before they reach the Dwarven line. I actually do make sure, I'm trying to make sure here to finish them off, firing those shots. They really got, the poor guys got Last Samurai there, and they are going to shatter here to the rear fire from the organ gun. And so the organ guns here are able to provide each other with some pretty good mutual support. In this heart of things, the Runesmith and the Rune Lord are tying down these men-at-arms battle pilgrims, which is really pretty critical. Slayers are diving in. This organ gun gets a point-blank volley into these men-at-arms, and I'm really not too concerned because the Dragonback Slayers are coming back. They are winded, but they're Slayers. They can deal with some filthy peasants, and this organ gun will be able to stick around and keep fighting. In the meantime, the Longbeards, because they're not done, they've got 473 HP. They're like, we got too much HP to spare. We need to get back into the fight. So here they go, marching straight back into the heart of things. Really kind of showing that Dwarvish stalwartness. A Comet of Casandor does go down on the organ gun, but despite doing quite a bit of HP damage, doesn't shut it down. In the meantime, you can see the Longbeards. The line did get kind of overwhelmed, but they're sticking around. They're refusing to go down, go quietly into this good night. You can see the archery fire focusing down the Longbeards here. Poor guys. They finally do shatter on 9 models and 162 HP, so they're not going quietly. In the pits, the Grail Rally getting overwhelmed by Slayers. The Fan Enchantress, of course, trying to get in there, but she doesn't have the best of... she does cause, once again, magic damage, which is a bit of a limitation. She doesn't have AP in melee, and she is somehow getting... I don't know how she's getting debuffed. She's getting... poisoned by... Oh, it's actually the friendly fire from the peasant arrows is actually poisoning her, and of course getting tied down here. The Slayers are just going to whack her down pretty hard. Now the Field Trebuchet is back online. It's only got 2 models left, but it is still firing away, and as you can see, it's doing quite a bit of hurt. You can see the organ gun here still firing away, doing quite a bit of hurt. 121 kills on this one, 97 on the other one, trying to destroy that backline. My Runesmith does get broken, but I did get a Rune of Wrath and Ruin on these men-at-arms, chipping away and hopefully dropping them below the point of no return. And you can see they do rout as the organ gun starts teeing off on these peasant bows. And the Runesmith here, once again, showing that Dwarvish unbreakability. He's on 231 HP, 165, but he's just refusing to rout. And despite the peasant bow fire, he's gonna get away here, waddle away there on his short little dwarven legs. The peasants are, of course, inaccurate, so they're struggling to hit a single model, especially at longer range. So definitely not some good stuff for my opponent. In the meantime, the Longbeards are getting back into the fray, cutting down these battle pilgrims with their infamous Dawi. I guess, I don't know, infamous Dawi courage here. Just look at him hack down these. Poor peasants. These bowmen just running away with their swords and bows slung on their backs. Just absolute disgrace. Really not able to hold their ground. Unfortunately for me, my opponent did get his trebuchets back online. You can see those 2 trebuchets still do have a lot of ammo, so definitely some rough stuff. But on the flip side, my Rune Lord is still around. My Runesmith is still around. And in fact, I do this Runesmith on 136 HP. Decides he's going to come back for another go. I'm actually using the last of my organ gun fire, trying to bring the Fan Enchantress down. Perhaps a bit of a mistake. Perhaps a little bit of a wasted effort there. Should have been better used cutting down some of the fleeing infantry. But nonetheless, for my opponent, it's definitely some rough stuff. You can see these battle pilgrims shattered. These peasant bows getting pursued by the Dragonback Slayers. And this is definitely the problem for my opponent right now. Dragonback Slayers are fast enough. This is why I think Slayers are... Well, part of the reason why Slayers are just so good, on top of their anti-large bonus, is that they're fast enough to catch enemy infantry. There's very little... I think the only skirmish infantry that they cannot catch is Shades and Way Watchers. So everything else they can run down, and if they get, those are the only skirmish infantry that they can't catch. So if you can get them on top of peasant bows or anything like that, they will chase it down, they will cut it down. You can see over here these Slayers, 7 models, still pursuing, but at this point my opponent's army does shatter. He has run out of ammo on the peasant bows, only the trebuchet really remaining, and even the Fan Enchantress has routed from the field in disgrace. So definitely a tight fight. Surprisingly, the Brettonians fought to almost the last peasant. As you can see, the losses were pretty brutal on both sides. My opponent lost about 3/4 of his army, well, actually a bit over. I lost about 3/4 of my army. So the losses were pretty even. The Dwarvish resilience paid off at the end because the Dwarves just refused to shatter and stuck around to the bitter end. Obviously, those 2 runes, you can see just how low all those Dwarf units were. Only 1 health unit of Dragonback Slayers, 1 7-man unit of Dragonback Slayers, and then some Longbeards. But really, there was some rough stuff. Is this a competitive build? I would not say so. Obviously, this build I think could have done actually a little better had my opponent gone more cavalry heavy. A lot of Brettonians do go more cav heavy, and in that sort of situation, or more elite heavy in general, they bring say more foot squires or more cav. You can tie them down a little better. You can get some more value out of your organ guns, I think. And that just didn't happen in this situation. It just didn't work out. My opponent actually mobbed me, and that caught me by surprise. On the flip side, though, I don't think this is a competitive build, like I said before. Definitely you'd want a bigger infantry contingent. Probably you don't need this many organ guns. It was just a lot of fun and kind of entertaining to watch. The organ guns mow down the Grail Knights as they try to charge in. For my opponent's build, I don't think this is the best of builds you want to be bringing with the Brettonians. Now, obviously, these peasants actually raked in some good value. But against a lot of Dowie builds, you'll see at least some sort of actual shooting troops. You'll see some Thunders or Quarrelers or a Goblobber that doesn't push to the front to try to knock out an artillery piece immediately. And in those sorts of situations, peasant bows get routed incredibly easily, and they really are not particularly accurate. They're not the most efficient troop type at cutting through the Dowie against anything but Slayers. I also think this is way too much invested in men-at-arms and battle pilgrims. You really don't need this much. I think had my opponent exploited his mob of infantry a little better, had he managed to get a surround, tie down my Slayers with men-at-arms, get those battle pilgrims in backline to tear up my organ guns, things could have looked very different. The foot squires could have traded with the longbeards. You definitely want to get ideal matchups, and my opponent, I don't think, did the greatest job of that. Try to get the foot squires into ideal matchups. Try to get the foot squires in against the longbeards. Try to get battle pilgrims in against Slayers or against artillery pieces. Try to get switch to get men-at-arms in to tie down the Slayers while your battle pilgrims get into the artillery, and then use the cavalry as kind of a mobile hammer into the back line. I don't think my opponent really took advantage of that, and the result was that he really just wasn't able to deal with the Dowie here. Finally, the Grail Relics, I think, are a major waste of money. If you're going against Dwarves, if you're maybe doing a bit of if you're maybe have a specific core of units you want or need to stay on the field as best you can, maybe one Grail Relic if you need to, say, keep some peasant bows on the field against Goblobber fire. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother with more than one. Honestly, I wouldn't even bother with one in most cases. And I think this was the biggest waste. 1,300 points that my opponent spent on Grail Relics. I do believe it's 1,300. It's been a while since I've thought about it. I do believe it's 1,300. Could have basically been spent. That's almost 2 foot squires. So 2 more foot squires in this sort of fight would have probably tipped the scale in his favor. Nonetheless, great game to Pete Top here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to share them down below and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.